It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Tuesday edition of the show. Hey, thanks so much, everybody, for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your workday. And, of course, hello to everybody out there listening on the RealAg Radio podcast as well. Well, today it's Tuesday. Usually we talk about issues and provide some insights on things that are happening in the world of agriculture. Because we didn't have a Canada Day show yesterday, and happy belated Canada Day to everybody out there, we're going to do Agronomic Tuesday today. We got a whole bunch of great crop school episodes from really across all the different crop types that we focus on here at Real Agriculture, as well as a soil school thrown in as well. So it'll be a lot of fun and very informative. Looking forward to it. We're going to hear from Dr. John Lauzon. He is with the University of Guelph. He was on a soybean school. And Dr. Lauzon and Bern Tobin had a chance to talk about how nutrients move and impact fertilizer management. So how nutrients move throughout the soil and how that impacts roots' ability to access them. We're also going to hear from Jeanette Gaultier of BASF and Renate Jochum of Pride Seeds, talking with Kelvin Hepner on a Manitoba cornfield about how to properly stage that corn crop. Very, very important when it comes to herbicide application, as well as calculating some of the thresholds when it comes to pests. Kaeley Kindrachuk, she is with Sask Canola. She chatted with Amber Bell of Real Agriculture out in a Saskatchewan field, looking at why we should be testing for blackleg, clubroot, and verticillium as three examples. I got some comments about sclerotinia management this year as well. Oh, and we're going to finish up with Peter Wheat Johnson. He's going to talk about timing harvest for fusarium-infected winter wheat. We heard last week on the Farmer Rapid Fire on Thursday's show. Definitely some concern out there because of the wheat crop in Ontario looks fantastic. With that comes, though, fusarium and early, the timely harvest, a critical component of lessening its impact. Now, if you have any feedback, questions, thoughts, we'd love to hear from you. You can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also find Real Agriculture across all the different social media platforms. You're also more than welcome to call the Real Ag feedback line. It is 855-776-6147. A little bit later on in the program, we're going to be talking about sclerotinia and its impact on the canola crop. Its cousin, its sister, however you want to call that, is white mold in soybeans. And Bern Tobin of Real Agriculture had a chance to catch up with old friend of the program, Ken Currah of BASF, to talk about how to identify and deal with white mold in your soybeans.
Ken, how's it going?
It's going fantastic today, Bern.
Yeah. Hey, now we're a nice field here.
Yep.
Oxford County, Ontario, and I want to talk about strategy for, fungicides. And you always say there's two conversations. The first one is about yield and quality, and the second one is managing diseases like white mold. Let's start with yield and quality. Where's that conversation begin?
Yeah, so you hit it right on the head. It's really about figuring out what your objectives are, and that dictates your strategy. So the yield quality discussion, this really comes down to the strobiluron or strobi mix fungicides, because of course from a resistance management perspective, we really like those products that have a different mode of action, like a 3 or a 7 or bull strapped on top of that strobi fungicide there, the group 11. But it really is the strobies that drive some broad spectrum foliar disease control. But the big thing is, at the end of the day, we see a healthier soybean plant, and what does that drive? Not so much more seeds per plant, but more uniform seed size and bigger seed size. So, you look at the seeds per pound, for example. We're going to see a nice cleaner sample. We can pick up 5 to 10% fewer seeds per pound, which means a heavier, denser seed, and that's where we're driving those few bushels that strobiluron fungicide picks up. Proper timing, pretty much right on R2.5. So that's those first pods unfolding on the top. One of the top 4 nodes of the plant, that's R2.5. Maybe a hair later if we're in a 2-pass program where that first pass was for white mold. But if you're just looking at, trying to drive some yield and some seed quality and seed weight by itself, take advantage of that good yield foundation that field has, it's R2.5.
Now, let's talk about white mold. The other other side of the coin, the other conversation. You always say, there's so many things to consider here, and it really starts with history. I mean, this doesn't sneak up on a lot of people. A lot of growers know it's coming and need to deal with it.
At the end of the day, no grower or agronomist should be surprised they have white mold. There's a lot of different factors involved here. Variety selection, some are stronger than others. Nothing is completely resistant to white mold. Field history, has it had white mold before? Because that sclerotinia, that fruiting body, can exist and viable in the soil for up to 8 years. So a couple of rotations for many, maybe 3 rotations for many. Lay of the land, right? Topography, obviously hot, stinky weather like we experienced here the 3rd week of June in Ontario, right? Frequent rains. Really important when we talk about white mold, that humidity within the canopy. So row width and plant density, plant type weighs into it, but it's always cooler. It's always more humid in the canopy, and that favors the development of disease when those sclerotinia release, as a fruiting body and release that pathogen into the soybean crop for infection.
You talk about a 1-pass or a 2-pass strategy. A lot of that, depends on, maturity and where you farm.
Yeah, exactly. Where you farm, how far north, how far south, when did you plant? The variety itself, although varieties tend to fluctuate a little bit with their growing environment, but it's really about how long is my peak flowering period. If we're growing a 0.5 to 0.8 or 0.9 maturity group soybean, your peak flowering period might only be 3 weeks. So if you're looking at a white mold prone environment, whether it's field history or just the current environmental conditions of the growing season, probably 1 pass at R2 to R2.5 is the right timing. Really, really important for growers to understand that sneaks up fast. We're standing here in V3, V4, right? 4th trifoliate is just unfolding. We're not that far away. We're a couple weeks. Summer solstice was Friday, I believe. So we're looking at, these are going to trigger flowering. They're going to get going. This window sneaks up very fast. So single pass, we're targeting that timing. Really important to be preventative and be on time with that pass, because if we miss that window and white mold gets into that field, or say we decline not to do it because we feel we're going to be okay, weather turns, now we're pushing the rope uphill in terms of trying to get on top of white mold. And really, once the end of July, 1st week of August comes, if there's no applications down, that's a tough one. You mentioned 2-pass. Yep, 2-pass is an interesting one to burn, because now you get to play some cards a little bit, right? You can play the true white mold product, right? Look for those best white mold products in the marketplace. They may or may not contain a strobe, but we really want to look for strength in white mold for that first pass. Isolate that product, go with the one that fits your program, and get that down on time. And then 10 to 14 days later, you're coming in with a strobe mix product, like I talked about earlier, to drive that seed weight and continue with that plant health. A lot of those products have white mold activity, so we're going to extend the white mold activity that was initiated by that true white mold product first. So, that may turn into like an R2 to 2.5 first pass, and then an R3 second pass. Really encourage growers and custom applicators as well, as if we get that really, really prone, high humidity, frequent moisture trapped in the canopy type environment, that 10 to 14 days, don't be ashamed to be 7 to 10 apart with those passes. You'll be rewarded for it.
Hey, final thing, and that is about staging. So important, whether it's R2, 2.5, 3. Put a graphic up here on the screen. Take us through the stages so we really know what we're trying to pinpoint.
Yeah, and first caveat, stages can overlap. Makes it even more fun. Uneven beans in some fields. Generally, you manage your first crop as your best crop, but you'll have to figure that out with your agronomist on how you want to play that game. And then chances are those areas that are white mold prone are probably also the areas that are best established in those variable fields. So that adds another wrinkle into the whole discussion. Pinpoint the staging. So R2, basically they term that as full flower, which means a flower present on one of the top 2 notes. R2.5, moving into R3, we're going to be looking for those first unfolding flowers on the top 4 nodes of the plant. That's really what you're looking for. The favorite or the preferred point of entry as far as that white mold pathogen getting into the plant is those senescing flowers. So we want to key in on those timings and those growth stages. You have some options in there. Generally, I like to have weed control done before we get to this flowering stage, but there may be an option to put in late glyphosate. I would encourage the conversation to be more about where were the gaps in weed control, whether it was weather or not enough residual horsepower up front. we could have that soybean aphid thing come along. Let's hope we don't. Really caution growers. Once you start putting 3 things in the tank on a stress crop, we're introducing more stress as the soybean plant has to metabolize those 3 chemistries. So really try to limit it to 2 things. Either a fungicide or insecticide is warranted. Fungicide plus the simple herbicide like glyphosate, for example, to clean up some late grass breaks or whatever. But keep it simple on this fungicide pass.
Awesome. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. We'll be back right after this.
FP Genetics relentlessly brings innovative new seed genetics to Canadian farms, ensuring growers, breeders, and farmers are supported and viable. Being a valued partner on your farm for decades, you can expect the continuous pursuit of the best genetics. Visit fpgenetics.ca to discover FP's hybrid fall rye varieties and their end uses, or contact your local FP seed dealer or territory manager to discuss your fall seed strategy specific to your region.
The Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com has everything you need to get your crop off to a great start and a strong finish. Whether you're growing chickpeas, faba beans, lentils, or peas, you'll get all the latest and best agronomic information at PulseSchool.com. A library of top-notch agronomy videos from industry experts available on demand at your fingertips. Visit the Pulse School, brought to you by BASF on RealAgriculture.com.
Peter Johnson at Wheat Pete, RealAgriculture.com, and what an opportunity! Oh my gosh! You think you can't grow better wheat? You are absolutely wrong. We're going to show you how to strive for those record wheat yields that they get in the UK and in New Zealand. You can grow 150 bushel wheat. I'll show you how.
Catch Wheat Pete's Word every Wednesday on RealAgriculture.com or download the podcast on iTunes or Spotify. Mentioned yesterday was Canada Day, and of course we've got Independence Day, July 4th on Thursday, so it is one of these bit of a fragmented week here this week, but we got you covered when it comes to agronomic issues. This is the first soil school that we have published here in 2024. It's brought to you by the Mosaic Company, and Bert and Tobin had a chance to catch up with soil scientist and researcher at the University of Guelph, Dr. John Lauzon. Talking about the movement of nutrients through the soil to get to the roots. Let's hear what Dr. Lauzon had to say.
We're going to dig into how nutrients move in the soil. As we'll learn from our guest, University of Guelph researcher Dr. John Lauzon, essential nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus move quite differently through the soil. And understanding how those nutrients move is key to helping growers choose the best application strategies. Here's John Lauzon. So John, let's kick this off with a look at the mobility of nitrogen and phosphorus. How do you compare their movement through the soil?
Okay, before we start, I'd like to thank you for having me on. And I want it to be clear that what we're talking about here today is the movement to the root surface and not the uptake itself. When we look at that movement, all nutrients move in one of 3 ways, either by root interception, where the root grows and simply comes in contact, mass flow, where the plant is taking in water and the nutrient moves with it, or diffusion. If we look at the nutrients that you talked about, some nutrients like nitrogen and sulfate move primarily by mass flow, so they are really high mobility nutrients, whereas phosphate, very low mobility.
Now, John, when it comes to grain and oilseed production, the goal is to get nutrients into the plant and drive yield. What role do corn and soybean roots play in intercepting N and P, for example? You talked about 3 ways. Let's talk a little bit about the roots.
Okay, often the roots are unseen, and so people don't worry about them too much. But really, if we're looking at that plant, that's the driver. That's the contact point between the soil and the plant, allowing for water and nutrient uptake. Clearly, having a bigger, robust root system is going to be better for nutrient uptake in each of those 3 ways. But really, it's the diffusion that's going to have the biggest impact from a thicker rooting system. And so it's going to have a bigger impact on phosphorus uptake than it will for something like nitrate.
Let's talk about water. Obviously, we're always managing rain and rainfall and water in the soil. How does mass flow influence uptake of nutrients? Obviously, we talked about roots. Let's talk about mass flow.
Okay, when we look at different plant nutrients, some of them exist almost entirely in the soil water. Nitrate, nitrogen, sulfate, almost entirely in the water. So when the plant is taking up that water, that nutrient moves along with. That means that nearly all of the uptake requirement of the plant can be attained simply by mass flow alone for those two. Phosphate, on the other hand, in the soil in its plant available form, forms something that we call precipitates. It forms a new compound with iron, aluminum, or calcium to form a calcium phosphate, for instance. In doing so, it essentially becomes part of the soil. Very little stays in the soil water, so mass flow brings to it a very, very small proportion of the total phosphorus requirement.
Now let's talk about how far nitrogen and phosphorus can actually move over the course of a growing season.
Because nitrate and sulfate, for instance, are almost entirely in the soil water, it can move a great distance. And the entire rooting zone is available for uptake due to just mass flow alone of those nutrients. But when you're looking at phosphate, because it forms those precipitates, very little in the soil water, so it's moving primarily by diffusion. Diffusion on its own is pretty slow. But when you also incorporate that idea that phosphate is reacting with the soil, it slows it down even further. That means that over the entire growing season, phosphate may move no more than about 1/16 of an inch, maybe 1/8 of an inch in total. And so if you're looking at that rooting system, a root system for corn and soybean may occupy no more than maybe 1% of the total soil volume. And if we're only looking at 1/8 of an inch at the most, maybe 1/16 in most cases around that root, only a really small proportion of the total soil volume is explored in any given year for phosphorus.
What about nitrogen?
Nitrogen, on the other hand, again, the entire rooting zone is explored. It moves inches, if not even feet in some cases, depending on how much water is moving and how far it's moving.
Now, how does that movement drive application strategy, John? When it comes to slow-moving phosphorus, for example, I'm assuming, banding would be an obvious strategy for growers.
Yeah, of course. If you think about phosphorus, if we broadcast apply it, that really early growth plant is only seeing a really small, minute part of it. And when you've got a plant like corn that has a relatively high requirement for external phosphorus during that very early growth period, that's just not going to cut it. So having phosphorus applied either in the seed trench, which is going to be able to encounter the very first roots that enter that soil, or in a sideband where some of the early roots might grow and happen to encounter it, is going to have a major benefit in terms of meeting the phosphorus demand during that early growth cycle.
John, for that seed place nutrient, how close is too close? What can happen if we get too close to that seed or too far away?
Okay, when we're looking at seed place, we're right on top of the seed. Now, the issue when we put a fertilizer on the seed or even close to the seed is the possibility for fertilizer injury, which is two different things. One is just a salt injury. When a seed germinates, it germinates because it contains a higher concentration of salts than the soil does around it. And that causes water to go into the seed by osmosis. When we add fertilizer nutrients, we're increasing the salt concentration. I don't mean the stuff we put on our French fries. I mean any ion in solution, which fertilizer nutrients are. And in doing so, there's not that big of a gradient, and water may not go into the seed, so it may not germinate or it may delay it. The other possible source of fertilizer injury is from urea application. When we apply urea fertilizer around that granule, two things happen. Yes, ammonium is released, but the pH also goes up a little bit. And that increase in pH can cause that ammonium to convert to ammonia. Now, we use ammonia in toilet bowl cleaners because it kills respiring cells. That germinating seed has lots of respiring cells, so we can very easily kill it as well. And so when we're really close to the seed placed, very small amount, maybe 10 kilograms per hectare of N plus K can go on. And no urea at all. As we move further and further away from the seed, our rates can go up, so that in a sideband we can go up quite a bit higher and have the same amount of safety. We can put on a little bit of urea as well. And so in terms of distance, really how far we are away dictates the chance of injury. The farther we are, the less chance, but the farther we are, the less chance of response too. We want to capture those very early roots, so going much more than 2 inches away and 2 inches below is probably too far.
Now, John, how does phosphorus source influence the impact of this strategy? How do growers best utilize MAP, for example?
Okay, when we're looking at fertilizer placed close to the seed, whether it's seed placed or in a side band, we're usually looking at a monoammonium phosphate, MAP, or a lot of the liquids would fit into the same category. And we're using that ammonium with the phosphate for a very specific reason. Yes, it meets part of the need for nitrogen during early growth, but in addition to that, when a plant takes up ammonium, it will release a hydrogen at the same time. That release of the hydrogen decreases the pH a little bit around the root surface. That decrease in pH can change the form of plant-available phosphate to a form that's slightly more mobile, resulting in maybe not a 1/16 of an inch, but maybe up to an 1/8 of an inch of that desorption zone, greatly increasing the amount of phosphorus that's totally available.
John, let's finish this up with a look at nitrogen. How does that faster movement through soil impact our nitrogen application strategy?
Okay, so the need for band placement is not as great. Yes, we would like to have a little bit for the reasons that I talked about and to meet some of the early need requirement of the plant. But in general, broadcast application is going to be fine for nitrogen because when nitrogen is converted to nitrate, the entire rooting zone is going to be explored by that plant. And so the positioning isn't as important. But remember that when we're talking about mass flow movement, leaching fits into that category as well. And so the potential is there to have movement down through the root profile outside of the rooting zone and then no longer available for a plant. Now, quite often people overestimate the potential for leaching. Leaching can only occur if there's more water in the soil system than what it can hold against gravity. What we call usually field capacity. And it takes quite a bit of water to reach field capacity, and through most of the summer our soils don't exceed it. But there are times in the spring where it might, and we could lose it. If we can apply a little bit later, the chance of loss out of the root zone is less, and the chance of getting it where we want it in the crop is greater.
John, this has been great. So appreciative of you for making time for the Soil School. Great to have you on Real Agriculture.
That was Dr. John Lauzon of the University of Guelph with Real Agriculture's Bernd Tobin in a recently published, the premiere episode of 2024 for the Soil School, brought to you by the Mosaic Company. You can find more episodes of the Soil School by going to the Real Agriculture YouTube channel or, of course, realagriculture.com. I do wonder, and this is a question for some of you out there that are farming in parts of the prairies where we have seen excessive rain. Huge amount, like the storms outside of Saskatoon or the west, look like kind of the west side, or sorry, I should say the east side of the province of Saskatchewan over the weekend. How concerned are you about leaching of nitrogen with all the moisture that you have had in some of those parts? Let me know. And what are you going to do about it if you are concerned? If you are somebody that is an agronomist in parts of these areas that have received excessive amounts of rain, or you're farming, I would love to hear from you and get your feedback on that. Haney at realagriculture.com. Okay, we'll be right back here on RealAg Radio. When we come back, we are going to hear from Jeanette Gaultier. We're going to hear about how to determine corn stage growth. It's going to be a corn school. We got lots of agronomic content as we continue here on RealAg Radio.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
I'm Lindsay Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomist, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomist with me, Lindsay Smith, Monday nights live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
Choose Viatude fungicide and unleash best-in-class sclerotinia protection in canola and premium protection against white mold in soybeans. Viatude contains a powerful premix of Onmira Active and prothioconazole. This unique combo delivers high-performance disease control, crop safety, mix compatibility, resistance management, and advanced mobility for excellent coverage and superior plant protection. Choose Viatude fungicide for stronger, more vigorous crops.
Staging your corn crop is pretty important when it comes to, say, herbicide application windows, as well as, when it comes to the threshold calculations on some pests. So we need to do it right, something I've never thought I'm very good at. This is where we get the experts in. Today's experts are Jeanette Gaultier of BASF and Renate Jochum of Pride Seeds. The ladies met up with Kelvin Hepner of Real Agriculture out in a field in Manitoba to look at the different possible ways that you can stage your corn crop. We need to be good at this. I know I need to be better. You probably are thinking the same in some cases where it gets a little bit more difficult and harder to get that number exactly right. Let's hear what our experts had to say in this episode of the Corn School.
Corn staging is critical, and on this episode of the Corn School, we're talking about the different ways of staging a corn crop for a herbicide application. I'm Kelvin Hepner with Real Agriculture, and pleased to be joined by Renate Jochum of Pride Seeds and Jeanette Gaultier of BASF. And Renate, why don't we start with you? The V staging method, is that your preferred method?
Yeah, so the V staging is my preferred method. It's hard to get mixed up with some of the other ones. It's pretty straightforward. So when you're looking at your corn plant, starting off with the very first true leaf here that has a rounded tip, you're going to start counting the collars up. So you can see that on the first leaf here we have a collar, the second leaf has a collar, third leaf has a collar, and the fourth leaf has a collar. So that will indicate that you're at the V4 stage. And then as you get more collars, you just add a number up. So even though we're kind of at 6 leaves here, we would stage it at V4.
Okay. Jeanette, what's your preferred way?
Well, I would say that most...
Pick your favorite child, Jeanette.
I do like the V staging.
Okay.
But herbicide labels, we actually tend to go with leaf over, because why be consistent? But no, we do use leaf over most often. So the difference here then is that we're still counting that first true leaf. So the guy with the rounded tip there, so does count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then this leaf, it still counts as leaf over. As soon as it's horizontal with the ground here, you can see it's kind of getting that arch. That counts it as a leaf over. This guy here, though, doesn't. So we are at 6 leaf. A general rule that does tend to work is adding 2 leaves to the V staging. And in this case, it works. It doesn't always, though, so good to just double check when you're in the field.
Okay. Leaf tip would be another method, counting the tips?
Absolutely, yeah. So then that method, you're truly just counting the tips. So here we've got the first true leaf with the rounded tip. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then you can see the 7th leaf tip is coming out. So you're at the 7th leaf with this stage.
Okay.
I like to call that the coffee shop brag staging. Sorry.
Yeah. Would some herbicide labels also just have straight height on them as well?
Yeah, that tends to be some of our group 4s in corn, which aren't necessarily used. We've switched over to a lot newer chemistry, but you can still use and find that on labels still. And if you ever do see that, just throw it out the window. We were talking just before about how short the corn is this year, despite how advanced it is in staging. And so that definitely happens depending on the year. The corn can be really tall, the corn can be really short. So using height is really a terrible way. So even when you do look at those labels that still have heights on it, it's a lot of work to go back and change a label, but definitely reach out to your rep with that company or reach out to even your retail, your agronomist. Generally, we have recommendations that refer back to corn staging.
All right.
That was Jeanette Gaultier of BASF and Renate Jochum of Pride Seeds, meeting up with Kelvin Hepner on a recent episode of The Corn School. The Corn School, of course, is brought to you by BASF Canada and Pride Seeds. You can find more episodes by going to cornschool.com. agronomic.com. Great timely episodes throughout the corn growing season that will keep you on top of all of the agronomic issues that are impacting your crop. Join Chatworth Farms in the county of Vermilion River on Saturday, August 17th for their 5th annual Alberta Open Farm Days. Taking the artisan market, live music, cooking demonstrations, a barbecue, and also farm tours. It's a free event you don't want to miss. Learn more by visiting chatsworthfarm.ca. Hey, we'll be right back here on RealAg Radio. Coming up next, we're going to hear from an agronomist with Sask Canola talking about disease testing of that crop. Yeah, that also, it's wet. The temperature is going to turn up. We're going to have some disease in that canopy, and we got to make sure we stay on top of it. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM.
It's summertime, and you've got a lot of important decisions to make when it comes to your corn crop. Let the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com help guide you through those big decisions with input from leading experts in the field. If it's spray timing, disease identification, or any other field issue, the Corn School's got you covered. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by BASF and Pride Seeds.
Infuse some energy into your next corporate event, customer meeting, or conference with RealAg Radio, Canada's national agriculture radio show. Create a unique experience at your next event with host Shaun Haney, broadcasting RealAg Radio live on Sirius XM, featuring exciting guests, captivating interviews, and the latest news from the agriculture community. Contact advertising at realagriculture.com or call 587-787-1795 to book your on location with RealAg Radio today.
When it comes to diseases like blackleg, clubroot, verticillium, we got to make sure we're doing some testing from our fields to ensure that we know exactly what's going on. In the past, there has been some confusion between blackleg and verticillium. We've got wet conditions as well, really impacting parts of the prairies. It's all of a sudden, it's a different problem to have than some of the drought that we have seen. Testing for clubroot is also going to be something you're going to hear a lot about, I think, here in the back end of 24 for sure, and some scouting and people making sure that they're on top of this. So recently on a Canola School episode, Amber Bell of Real Agriculture dug into what are some of the options when it comes to testing of these three menaces on the prairies.
I am here today doing a canola school with Kaeley Kindrachuk of Sask Canola, and we're going to talk about disease testing and why it's important and what it looks like and what you should be doing. Hi, Kaeley. It's really nice to be here with you. Nice to be out here in Saskatchewan. It actually was really sunny like 5 minutes ago.
Right. Yeah, this is just Saskatchewan.
It is, hey? So we're going to talk about disease testing today.
Yep.
Let's start off with why we should be doing it and what we should be testing for.
Sure. So all throughout the growing season, farmers and agronomists are scouting their fields physically in the field. Mm-hmm. And this gives us a lot of good information, but we can take it one step further when it comes to canola diseases and knowing exactly what's in our fields. So we can't manage what we don't know. So that's where the disease testing comes in and can help us confirm what's in the field. So it can be very valuable for canola diseases like clubroot, blackleg, and verticillium stripe.
Okay, and how does that differ from scouting? What does that look like?
So when we are testing for disease, we're taking physical samples out of the field and sending it into a lab for confirmation. So when it comes to clubroot, we're going to be taking soil samples to look for the clubroot pathogen within the soil. And when we look at blackleg or verticillium stripe, we're taking stem samples and submitting it to the lab.
What decisions can producers make with the results of the disease test? Like they get it back from the lab, what does that mean out in the field?
So it can help when you are making decisions for that canola field in the future. So when we are looking at clubroot, for example, the results come back in spores per gram of soil. So we know if the pathogen has been detected and at what levels. When we look at blackleg, it comes back as presence or absence of Leptosphaeria maculans. And then if it's present, the lab will also tell you what races were present on those canola stems, and verticillium stripe is reported as presence or absence. So this can help us when we are trying to choose the right canola cultivar for the field the next time canola is grown. So when we are looking at the blackleg races that could be present in the field, that's really helpful, as canola seed companies are now starting to label their varieties with the major resistance genes. So that can be matched with the genes that are found in the field, or the races that are found in the field, and it can help you to choose the right variety so that you are choosing the right resistance package for that field.
Okay, so a producer has decided, hey, we're going to send this to lab, we want to get tested. So what are the proper techniques for actually going and taking that material up from your field?
You're going to take the soil samples from the high traffic areas of the field, water runs, field entrances, low spots, those types of places. Submit the samples to either the Ministry of Agriculture regional offices or Discovery Seed Labs, and then the results will be available in the early winter and will come only from a Saskatchewan Agriculture staff member, and will only be given to the submitting producer or agronomist. It's important to note now that those results will not be given to any RMs because a positive in the pathogen detection in a soil sample does not equal visual clubroot symptoms. So it will only be given to the farmer or the agronomist. And then also to note, Sask Canola is advocating for clubroot to be removed from the Pest Control Act in Saskatchewan. We feel that it has served its purpose on the Act and it doesn't need to be included in the list of pests anymore, but that doesn't mean that it's not still a very important disease for canola farmers in the province. What we're doing now with the biosecurity, proper crop rotation, using resistant cultivars, and surveillance is really important, and we're going to keep up on it, and we'll continue to invest money into research for clubroot into the future.
Oh wow! So what does that mean? What would the outcome of that be if it's removed from the Pest Act?
Farmers are the best people to manage their crops, and they've been managing clubroot well in the province, and so we're leaving it up to the farmers to be able to manage on their own. And when it comes to blackleg and verticillium stripe, we're going to be taking the stem samples from the field. So we're looking at about 9 to 10 inches from the crown, including any infected portions of the stem. Drying them in a paper bag and sending the dried samples to the lab. So you're going to want to sample for blackleg and verticillium stripe around that 60% seed color change or swath timing. And those results come from myself or somebody at the Ministry of Agriculture, depending on how or where the sample was submitted. So when you receive the results in the fall, you can make that decision for that canola field for the next time canola is grown on that field.
Oh, that's great. That's really useful. And okay, so you mentioned that Sask Canola is offering testing. Can you let us know what that costs, what that looks like, how producers can get more information on it?
Yeah, so our disease testing program is free for Saskatchewan canola producers. So with the clubroot, you got to call in and get a soil test bag, and we'll send that out to you, or you can contact a Ministry of Agriculture regional office or a Sarm Plant Health technical advisor. And then with blackleg and verticillium stripe, again, call our office, we'll give you a testing code, and what that code does is basically just tells the lab that it's part of our program and to bill us accordingly.
Oh, that's great.
So program details will be announced in July, and then we'll be sharing that through our social media, newsletter, texting, so producers can visit our website and find all the information for taking soil samples and plant samples there. So we also do have some field days coming up to focus a little bit more on disease identification. If there's farmers or agronomists who maybe want to ask some questions while out in the field and they just maybe need a little bit more support. So at ECRF in Yorkton, ICDC in Outlook, and NARF in Melfort, toward the end of August, we will be having some disease identification field days in partnership with Saskatchewan Agriculture, the AgriArm sites, and the Canola Council of Canada. And we're going to focus on disease scouting, identification, and taking samples to submit to the program. So details for that will come out in July, and everybody is invited to attend.
That's great. It's wonderful to know that there's so much support for canola growers in Saskatchewan.
For sure, yeah. And if anybody ever has questions, feel free to call Sask Canola and let us know.
Wonderful. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
The Canola School on Real Agriculture is brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola. You can find more episodes of the Canola School by going to canolaschool.com or checking out the Real Agriculture YouTube channel. We talked about scouting a little bit on last week's show, but one of the things you're going to definitely want to do when it comes to disease this year in scouting is stay on top of Sclerotinia. You know, with all the moisture that we've had and temperatures going to be dialing up here in July, watching out for that petal drop. There's going to be we're going to see a lot of spraying. We are going to see a lot of spraying with fungicides of, trying to protect that plant from Sclerotinia. And of course, if you are using a variety that does have higher amounts of tolerance resistance, that doesn't mean you don't have to spray. So don't fall into that trap as well. So stay on top of this one for sure. Get out there and scout, and make sure that we're spraying if we have to. If we've got a crop out there, we definitely want to protect it from a disease that can rob us of some of that yield. And there is lots of fungicide around. If a couple of years of drought, we'll do that. So make sure you talk to your local retailer about some of the best options for that application. Okay, when we come back on RealAg Radio, we're going to continue here with what we're calling Agronomic Tuesday. We'll be back right after this.
Canola is more than just a pretty face in the prairie landscape. It's a big business, both here and around the world, that requires you to be informed and up to date on everything it takes to grow a successful crop. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com has an expert library of video resources covering markets, agronomy, and more to help you grow a healthy and profitable canola crop. Visit canolaschool.com today. Brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
I get to spend every day talking to farmers in the ag industry through RealAgriculture.com and RealAg Radio. But nothing is more fun than speaking to an audience live and in person. If you're planning an ag event, book a Real Agriculture speaker to make it a successful and memorable experience. Email shaney@realagriculture.com and you can book myself or any other Real Ag personality to speak at your event. Bring your audience all the fun, insight, and energy of Real Agriculture. For the most part, if you're growing wheat, one of the diseases that you are the most concerned about is fusarium head blight. It definitely rears its ugly head and it's more than just a robber of yield. It's devastating when it comes to yield. Pete Johnson, Real Agriculture's agronomist, was out in the field in Ontario, and Pete's pretty passionate, of course, about fusarium and trying to bring home this wheat crop. There's a very, very good wheat crop out in Ontario. And we want to maximize the yield, and we got to fend off against fusarium in any way that we possibly can. Some of that comes down to harvest strategy. Let's hear about it. Here is Pete Johnson talking about fusarium.
We're here in Ontario, and we look like we've grown an awesome wheat crop in 2024. And of course, what comes along? We haven't had it for a while, but the beast is back, fusarium. So, what do we know about fusarium? Well, first, we know that it's quite dependent on regions. There are regions where the fusarium pressure is quite high, almost 1996 levels, tremendous. There are other regions where it's not too bad. But when we look at it from a management standpoint, so as agronomists, as growers, we have to do our best to keep the level of toxin, the DON, the deoxynivalenol, as low as possible. How do we do that? We harvest as early as we can. We dry the wheat. Anytime over 19%, that wheat is going to make more toxin. So we harvest early, we dry the wheat, but we got to get way better at targeting which fields we do first. So we've never scouted for fusarium before. How do we do that? And what do we know beyond over 19% get it out of the field? Well, here's a really interesting tidbit that Dave Hooker tweeted out. Lodged wheat. If your wheat is lodged for 5 days, just 5 days before harvest, the lodged wheat increases in toxin from 27 to 51%. So that's pretty simple. I have a lodged wheat field. I have to harvest that field early if I can at all, because it's going to get more toxin. The other thing, though, is I've got 10 wheat fields, and they all headed at different times. They're different varieties. How do I know which field I should harvest first? Because the ones with the most fusarium, I got to get out of the field as quickly as I can. Well, that's where scouting comes in, and we do what is called the Fusarium Head Blight Index. And that's a rating that gets us to a point where we can actually somewhat predict, is that field going to be a problem for Dawn, or is that field not a big issue and I can leave it? So how do we do that? Well, we have to start looking for fusarium. The first thing we have to start looking for is how many heads have any infection at all. One spikelet, the whole head gone, whatever. Any infection at all. And so you look at this wheat and you say, gosh, come on, Pete, I don't have to do anything. I know this is ugly. And then I look at this wheat and I say, come on, this field's fine. Well, guess what? This field is not fine, or this variety. And a trick from Ellen Sperry, you look at this, you're looking kind of down at the heads. It's a little hard to see. This is also later maturing, might not have all developed yet. But if you just push the heads over, then all of a sudden you can see, gosh, that floret's infected, that floret's infected, that floret's infected. There's more fusarium here than I realized. Okay, so how do we do the Fusarium Head Blight Index? First thing we do is we blindly, because that you'll go for where the fusarium is, you blindly grab a bunch of heads and you try to get about 10 heads because it's easiest if you can. And then you look and you say, okay, I have 10 heads, or I have to add one, I have to subtract one, and then out of those 10 heads, how many of those heads have any infection at all? Do they have one floret? Is the whole head gone? Out of 10 heads, if 3 are gone, then that's 3 or 30%. And you do that in 10 spots in the field to get a representative sample. As you do that, you also say, I have 3 heads, but what percentage of the head is actually gone? That's called severity. The number of heads infected is incidence. The amount of infection is severity. And so you say, well, that's pretty tough. I have 1 floret on this plant gone, Pete. What's the severity? It's actually pretty simple. Most wheat heads in Ontario have about 20 spikelets. So if 1 spikelet is gone, that's a 5% number. If I have 4 spikelets gone, that's 20%. When I get to this head, it's pretty simple. That's 2/3 of the head. We do average severity. So in my example, let's say that on average, I have 2 out of 10 heads that are infected. So that's 20%. And let's say that out of that 20%, they're about 20% of the heads infected. So 4 florets on average, or 4 spikelets rather, on average. So 20% times 20%, that's 20 times 20 is 400. 400 divided by 100 gives me a fusarium index of 4. So how does that help? Well, the research data is pretty clear. When Dwayne Falk did this way back originally, if you had a fusarium head blight index of 3, that meant that a lot of the wheat coming out of that sample would be greater than 6 parts per million. So we just kind of extrapolate that, and our best guess is that if your fusarium head blight index is over 2, that field's a problem. Wheat Pete thinks that it's over 1, you want to pay attention. That's a suspect field. If it's under 1, chances are you have no problem whatsoever. So there, a cool new tool, because somehow we have to get the best quality wheat out of our wheat crop in Ontario that we can, and we have not ever scouted for fusarium in this manner, where we actually try to quantify it so that you can time your harvest, so that you can try to get the best quality grain you have. And it's scouting, it's the Fusarium Head Blight Index, a new tool in the wheat arsenal to take to the field.
That was Peter Wheat Pete Johnson on a recent Wheat School episode. And you can find more episodes of the Wheat School by going to wheatschool.com. Or, of course, the Real Agriculture YouTube channel. We got great wheat agronomic content for anybody in Western, Eastern, Central Canada, as well as the U.S. And lots of great comments coming in. across some of those videos on YouTube. And like I said, you can find them at the YouTube channel of ours or at wheatschool.com. And it's brought to you by C&M Seeds, Alberta Grains, and Syngenta Canada. And as we said at the beginning of the program, wet weather on the Western Canadian prairies. It is funny, well, maybe not so funny, but it is interesting how each year is so different. And we went from 60, 90 days ago really concerned about drought conditions continuing. We continue to see heavy rainfall in parts of Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba through the weekend, and really kind of forecast in parts for this week as well. And the temperature just has not dialed up. We've had nice days. We have had a few warm ones, but there's no real consistency to it, which has led to some good that's leading to some positive conditions when it comes to wheat. The cereals, I don't care what farmer you talk to, they'll say my cereals really look good. And but hey, for the corn, it needs some heat. That's the crop that needs the heat. And the soybeans need the nighttime temperatures for some of those soybean acres that are in parts like Manitoba, for example. Some crops do well with wet feet, some do not. And so we got different challenges this year than we did last year. So this is where these crop schools really come in handy. It gives you timely information. For 3 years, it seemed like all we did was drought videos. We've given up on that. We switched, and thank goodness for you and for us. But make sure you check out all the different crop schools that we have: pulse, canola, soybeans, corn, wheat, as well as we talked about the soil school here as well. So let me hear about your conditions and some of the things that you are challenged with, especially on the problem side. So it helps out our editorial team to make sure they get some topics that we need to be focusing on that are really, really timely, and get you some answers with some of the experts that are out there across the geography of Canada and the U.S. I'd love to hear back from the audience for sure. Today we are broadcasting the show from our studios in Lethbridge, Alberta. But there's a big but to that. It's moving day around here. We're packing up, building boxes, loading them, and putting them in the half-ton, so to speak, and we're not going too far. We've been in. If you've listened to this show for a long time, you know that we used to broadcast this show from what used to be our family farm. Now, last 5 years, we've been broadcasting here from a studio on the west side of Lethbridge, and today's the last day. It's moving day around here. We're moving studios. Yeah, we're packing up and moving out and driving across the river. By the way, we're just talking about moisture. I don't think I've seen the coulees this green on the 2nd of July. It feels like decades. That's an exaggeration, but I'll tell you what, it is amazing how green it is in the river bottom. So anyway, we're going to cross the river, and we're going downtown Lethbridge. We're going to be in downtown L.A. as they try to tag the motto or the tagline here in Lethbridge, and we got a new office. Yes, we're new to us, I should say. Rather old building in the city, historic building, and we've got some. We're moving our studio over there, so that's gonna be really. It's gonna be a busy afternoon, and if you've ever moved, you realize how much not fun that is, and the constant question of why do we have this? Who saved this? Whose idea? And I don't know if you know this about me, but I am a tad bit of a pack rat. Yep. We may need that. We could need that. We will need that. Yeah, and you never do. You never do. Really? Well, you could, though. That's the problem. You can't rule it out. Like, remember on Dumb and Dumber? Where he's like, so you're saying there's a chance. Yes, there's a chance we may need that cord. We may need that picture. Yeah. Oh, that's sentimental. Yeah, I'm that guy. So it's going to be a fun day of moving here at Real Agriculture. So tomorrow, the rest of the week, we'll be broadcasting from a different studio, our new studio. So looking forward to that. If you have any feedback, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, or of course you can call that RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Thanks everybody for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio, and we'll chat again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody.